My name is Malik Carter, and I should have known the blade would be silent. 7 years. That's how long I gave to Revi on logistics. Not clocking in and out, no. I built the bones of that company. From a dusty co-working space with a broken coffee machine to a full-scale logistics powerhouse. Juliana Cross, my wife, my partner, the so-called visionary, she had the polish. The name. The kind of charm that walked into a boardroom and made people loosen their ties and nod along. But I had the grit. The know-how. I was the one running late-night diagnostics, sketching architecture models on napkins, pitching solutions with passion when all we had was promise. I remember those early mornings when Juliana and I would sit on the floor of that office, sharing cheap bagels and dreaming out loud. One day, this will all be real, she'd say. It felt like we were building something sacred, something that couldn't be broken because it was built with our sweat, our shared vision. But turns out, I was building my own noose. The Syntrax deal was everything. A $50 million contract that walked us back from the edge when cash flow was drying up and we were staring down a brutal quarter. It wasn't just money, it was reputation, validation. It was the kind of deal that made other clients say, let's talk. And I got it. I worked it for a year of persistence, strategy, late-night calls with procurement officers, late flights, follow-ups, lunches that led to relationships that led to contracts. And when the ink dried, when it was finally signed, I thought we were safe. I thought Juliana and I would raise a glass and toast to what we'd built, what I'd secured. Instead, a week later, I was standing in a boardroom and Juliana was looking at me like I was a loose wire she'd meant to cut months ago. The room was full, her Ivy League crew, the type who wore cologne-like armor and corrected you mid-sentence with a smile. I wasn't intimidated. I never had been. Because I knew the numbers better than any of them. I knew the code that powered our tracking system. I knew the pulse of our logistics chain better than any consultant in the room. So when she cleared her throat, stood up with that carefully constructed grace, and said, "We've decided to make some leadership adjustments moving forward," I still didn't flinch. Not at first. Then she looked right at me. "Malik, your contributions have been appreciated. But we need men with real degrees here." Laughter. Subtle. Quiet. "But it's great." My degree from Riverside State, earned while holding down 2 jobs, now reduced to a punchline in her little theater. Her eyes flicked toward the framed diplomas on the wall. Like mine was an accident she'd tolerated for too long. I didn't argue. What was I going to say? That I built the tech that got us into enterprise markets? That I landed Syntrax while she was in Aspen talking branding? That I stayed through all the moments she talked about needing space, needing air, while I carried us? No. I just stood there. She thought that was weakness. I nodded once, slow. Picked up my coat. I remember the soft slide of my palm against the wool fabric. The way the boardroom air felt colder once I knew I didn't belong. I didn't say a word as I walked out. Not even when Allison, the same HR director who once told me in a drunken holiday party whisper that I was Revi in soul, refused to meet my eyes. The hallway outside was quiet, sterile. I passed the wall of accolades. My name wasn't on any of them. Not the articles. Not the plaques. Always Juliana Cross and Revion Logistics. Like I'd been her intern, I stepped into the elevator. Alone. And that's when the shaking started. Not rage. Not even sadness. Just the kind of numb tremble you get when the thing you gave everything to cuts you like you were never there. Like you were noise in the background of someone else's success. Outside, the sky was gray. Fitting. I didn't go back to the office. Didn't clean out my desk. Let them mail my things in a cardboard box like they would for any other redundant asset. It was over. But not done. Because there's something about betrayal that doesn't rot quietly. It ignites. And as I stepped out onto the street, people passed me like I was just another guy in a coat. None of them knew I'd just been erased. But I knew. And I wasn't about to stay invisible. Griffin Locke. The name alone sounded like a password to a country club I'd never be invited to. He had the look. Clean jawline. Tailored suit. That perfect part in his hair that said, "I never sweat." Juliana introduced him at the press briefing like he was royalty. "A bold new chapter," she'd said. As if the ink hadn't still been wet on the Syntrax deal I brought in. The cameras flashed. Griffin smiled for them. The way a man smiles when he's handed something he didn't earn. Enterprise credibility. That was the phrase she used in the internal memo to the board. Said Rev Ion needed a more polished public face to scale in today's market. Translation. Griffin looked better next to her on magazine covers. He had an MBA from Wharton and a Rolodex full of other polished ghosts who knew how to talk without saying a damn thing. But what Juliana didn't know and what Griffin couldn't fake was that the CEO of Syntrax, Tarek Morrison, was my college roommate. Tarek and I go way back. Late-night ramen. Shared textbooks. Patching together resumes to get our first internships. We weren't just old friends. We were brothers in the trenches. He knew where I came from. Knew what I'd sacrificed. Knew how I fought my way into rooms that weren't made. But I never cashed that friendship chip. When I brought Syntrax to the table, I earned it. 12 months of strategy, problem-solving, and persistence. No shortcuts. No name drops. But Juliana assumed I was disposable. Assumed that a shiny new executive and a few buzzwords could replace grit and relationships. She didn't even ask me to stay on through the implementation. She just cut me loose like bad code. And the board? Silence. Every last one of them, including Allison, who once cried in my office after her divorce, saying I was the only one at Rev Ion who treated her like a person. It burned. Quietly. The kind of burn that doesn't scald, but simmers under your skin until you feel it in your bones. I packed my box myself. My real box. The things they hadn't noticed. The blueprint I sketched on the back of a lunch receipt. The handwritten thank you note from a small vendor I'd saved during a supply chain delay. A photo of Juliana and me from year 2, back when we were still us, both exhausted and grinning, covered in packing tape and startup dreams. I looked at that photo for a moment, then dropped it in the trash. The elevator ride down felt longer than the climb to the top ever did. Back home, my apartment felt foreign, like I'd walked into a life that had been paused and left behind. The furniture was still the same. The dishes still in the rack. But the man standing in the center of the kitchen wasn't the one who left that morning. Monday morning came fast. 9 a.m. Syntrax was scheduled for their integration meeting at Rev Ion HQ. Tarek would be there. So would Juliana. So would Griffin, trying to bluff his way through a roadmap he hadn't helped build. I didn't even need to imagine it. I knew the script. Juliana would take center stage. Griffin would strategize from his polished perch. And somewhere in the room, they'd try to rewrite history. But Tarek didn't play pretend. At 9:35, my phone buzzed. I'd been staring at it without touching it. Black coffee going cold in my hands. When I flipped it over and saw Deshawn's name, I answered on instinct. His voice hit the line like a lightning bolt. Bro, you should have seen Juliana's face when Tarek walked in. I said nothing. Just waited. First thing out of his mouth. No hello. No handshake. He just looked around the room and said, "Where's Malik?" The silence on the other end of that boardroom must have been thick enough to drown in. Griffin tried to play it off. Deshawn continued. Talking about you stepping away for personal reasons. But Tarek wasn't having it. Straight up said, if Malik isn't managing this project, there is no project. Just like that. You could hear a damn pin drop. I smiled then. Not out of revenge. Not out of arrogance. Just validation. After all the gaslighting, the dismissal, the erasure, it was one sentence that brought the truth roaring back. You should have seen Griffin's face, Deshawn chuckled. Like somebody pulled the rug out from under his inheritance. Did Tarek walk out? Asked. Nah, he said. He just sat down, real calm, and repeated it. No Malik, no project. Then he just stared at Juliana. I closed my eyes and exhaled. They thought I was gone. They thought I was replaceable. But you can't swap soul with surface. Not in business. Not in life. And now? Now they'd have to watch everything I built walk right out the door with me. I sat in my kitchen with a chipped black mug in hand, steam curling over the rim, and not a single drop of urgency in my body. No meetings to rush to. No suits to iron. No smile to fake. Just me, the bitter strength of black coffee, and the knowledge that the biggest meeting in Rivian's history was happening without me. I didn't need to be there. Not physically. I knew every item on that agenda because I built it. I'd mapped out every phase of the Syntrax rollout, organized every piece of their logistics infrastructure, and tested every inch of the integration. And now, Juliana and Griffin were about to walk into that room with my blueprint, hoping no one noticed the name missing from the bottom of the page. I imagined her in one of those power red dresses she saved for board meetings, sitting straight-backed and smug at the head of the table, ready to take credit for what she didn't even understand. Griffin, polished and hollow, would posture, speak in vague phrases like streamlined efficiency and scalable innovation, hoping no one asked him a real question. They'd probably start with a slide deck, clean graphics, empty jargon. But I knew one thing they didn't. Tarek doesn't suffer fools. 915. I turned my phone face down on the counter. The screen had already buzzed twice, probably Deshawn or some confused board member trying to loop me in last minute. Let them sweat. Let them piece it together in real time. I poured another cup, leaned against the counter, and let silence wash over me. At 9:35, my phone buzzed again. A longer vibration this time. I let it ring, then flipped it over. Deshawn. I picked up. Bro, he said. No hello. No pause. His voice lit with adrenaline, like he couldn't contain it. You should have seen Juliana's face when Tarek walked in and asked, "Where's Malik?" I felt the corners of my mouth twitch, but I didn't speak. I wanted to hear every word. Dead serious, man, Deshawn went on, barely catching his breath. He sat down, looked around, didn't even shake hands, just asked, calm as hell. "Where's Malik, Carter?" Everyone froze. Juliana looked like someone slapped her with a court order. Still, I said nothing. Griffin tried to cover it. He continued, snorting. Said you were out for personal reasons and that he'd be handling the implementation. Man, Tarek didn't even blink. He just leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "If Malik isn't managing this project, there is no project." Then he folded his hands and waited. I closed my eyes and let it land. Not out of pettiness. Out of peace. You give your life to something, get tossed aside like a paper cup, and then the one person who knows your worth walks in and makes it undeniable. That kind of validation doesn't need applause. It just settles in your chest like armor. What happened after that? I asked quietly. Silence, Deshawn said. Like real silence. No keyboard clicks. No throat clearing. Just dead air. Then Juliana tried to laugh it off, like Tarek was joking, but he didn't even crack a smile. Just looked her in the eye and said, "This deal was built on trust. I trust Malik. If he's gone, so are we." Boom. Just like that. I laughed then, low and deep. Not out of revenge, but because I remembered every single time she told me to stay behind the scenes. Every time she polished up my work and presented it like her own. All those late nights, all the problem-solving, all the client hand-holding, now standing as a monument she couldn't claim without me. Griffin said anything? I asked. Man, Griffin looked like a deer in traffic. Started mumbling something about transitions and contingency plans. Tarek stood up mid-sentence. Just stood up, collected his folder, and said, "I'll wait to hear from Malik." Then he walked out. Didn't shake hands. Didn't look back. The satisfaction wasn't in their failure, it was in the clarity. Finally, the truth was undeniable. I wasn't a shadow behind a spotlight. I was the spotlight. "Thanks for the call," I said, placing my cup down, now empty, but somehow more fulfilling than anything I'd sipped in months. "Thought you'd want to hear it from someone who was there," Deshawn replied. "And hey, if things change, you know I'd work for you again in a heartbeat." I paused. That stuck with me. He didn't say, "work with you," he said for. There was respect in his voice. Loyalty. And I realized in that moment, whatever came next, I wouldn't be starting from scratch. After I hung up, I sat down at the small kitchen table that doubled as my war room. I had a laptop, a notepad, and an open day. And yet I wasn't aimless. No. Juliana's empire had just found its missing piece was never hers to discard. The phone buzzed again, twice in rapid succession. First Juliana. Then Martin, the CFO. I didn't answer. Let them sit with it. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing anything. They were chasing me. Juliana Cross, read the screen, like a name I used to know. I stared at it, one hand resting on the edge of my coffee mug, still warm from the morning brew. I didn't touch the phone. Just let it ring out. Watch her name flicker like a weak flame, then vanish. Second call, 10 minutes later. Third, not long after. Her persistence was telling, but I already knew what she wanted. Syntrax had pulled the pin. Now she was trying to defuse the bomb with charm and desperation. I'd seen that switch in her before, the way her tone could change when the tides turned. When she needed something. And now that Tarek had walked out of her boardroom like a storm in a tailored suit, she was scrambling for cover. Then came the texts. Can we talk? Just a quick call? Let's clear the air. You were always part of this. I almost laughed at that one. I hadn't even been considered part of a meeting, let alone the company, when she tossed me out like outdated software. Now I was always part of this. They should have put that in the exit memo. The next alert wasn't from her. It was Martin Frost, Reavian CFO. I hadn't heard his voice since the day he looked away while she fired me. He had that same practiced neutrality as a poker dealer, always calculated. So if he was calling, things had officially moved from PR spin to damage control. I ignored his first call. Then the second. It was the email that broke the pattern. Subject line, urgent, re-Syntrax implementation. Just like that. Cold, corporate, panicked. I opened it. Malik, I hope this message finds you well. I won't waste your time. It's clear we underestimated the value of your leadership in the Syntrax integration. We're requesting a meeting to discuss a path forward, and we would greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk this through. Please advise your availability. Regards. Martin Frost, Chief Financial Officer, Reavian Logistics. No apologies. No accountability. Just a white flag dipped in formality. I didn't respond right away. I let the hours drag. Let them sit in the silence they once forced on me. Around 3 p.m., the phone rang again. I didn't even look this time. Just picked it up, pressed the green button, and leaned back in my chair. Martin's voice came through, brittle and too polite. Malik, thank you for taking the call. I didn't say anything. I know emotions have likely run high since your departure. He began. Wrong choice of words. I stayed silent. We acted hastily. In retrospect, it was a miscalculation. When we regret deeply. Still no reply. I let him stew in it. He took a breath. I've spoken to Juliana. The board. We would like to formally ask you to return on your terms. I almost said, now you want my terms? But I kept my voice calm, steady, as smooth as the whiskey I'd been eyeing on my shelf. I'm not interested. That stunned pause that followed? That was the music I'd waited to hear. I understand, he said, but his tone betrayed him. He didn't understand. None of them did. They thought value lived in resumes and titles, not in the trenches. Not in loyalty or quiet work done right. Martin cleared his throat. If there's anything we can offer, title, compensation. I've already moved on. And I had. Maybe not signed on the dotted line yet, but I knew my next chapter didn't belong to them. It never had. I hung up before he could fumble out another empty offer. Then I opened my calendar app, 3:45 p.m. A block was already there. Meeting. Silas Green. Axion Solutions. That wasn't an accident. That was timing. What no one at Revion realized was that I hadn't sat idle after walking out. I'd watched. Calculated. Tarek's public loyalty had given me momentum, and I'd used it. I was no longer trying to get back in the room. I was building my own. The call for Martin had proven what I'd suspected all along. Revion needed me more than I ever needed them. They weren't calling because they valued me now. They were calling because their castle had sprung a leak, and I was the only one who remembered how to work the foundation. But I wouldn't be their patchwork solution. I wasn't coming back to fix what they broke. I was already laying bricks elsewhere with people who saw me. Let them panic. Let them call every hour. Let Juliana send all the texts she wanted. I was done answering to a room that only heard me when it was too late. I didn't waste time sulking in the wreckage Revian left behind. That wasn't my style. Some men nursed their wounds with anger or whiskey. I preferred strategy and timing. It started with a single name, dropped casually over drinks by Tarek months ago, back when we were still finalizing the Syntrax proposal. We were sitting on the rooftop of a midtown bar, looking out over the city's jagged skyline, trading stories from the old days. That's when he leaned in and said, "You ever heard of Silas Green? Runs Axion Solutions. Quiet guy. Smart as hell. He's gonna eat Revian's lunch in 5 years." 5 years suddenly didn't feel so far away. Sunday night, I opened a blank email. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before I started typing. I didn't attach a resume. Didn't list my accolades. I didn't have to. Men like Silas don't care about bullet points. They care about vision. So I gave him mine. 3 paragraphs, sharp and simple. I told him who I was, what I'd done, and how I'd like to do it again, but bigger, better, and with someone who valued trench work over titles. I hit send at 10:13 p.m. and shut the laptop. By 7:48 a.m. the next morning, I had a reply. "Malek, heard of you through Morrison. If you're free this evening, I'm buying coffee. Let's talk. SG." By 5:30 p.m., I was seated across from him at a quiet corner cafe in the city's West End. The place was small, understated. No brand logo splashed across the walls. Just warm lighting, real ceramic cups, and the kind of ambient jazz that made you feel like ideas could take root there. Silas Green didn't look like a disruptor. He wore jeans, a blazer, and Nikes that had clearly been through a few late nights. No entourage. No laptop. Just a notepad and a pen. "You're taller than I expected," he said as I sat down. "You're younger than I expected," I replied. He smirked. "Let's talk business. No pleasantries. No filler." I told him everything, well, everything that mattered. I explained the Syntrax deal, the systems I built, the enterprise clients I brought into the fold, the hours I gave that no one tracked. And I told him how Revian discarded it all for optics and polish. His expression didn't shift much, but his pen didn't stop moving either. Finally, he closed the notebook and looked me in the eye. "They fired the architect and kept the decorators." I chuckled because, yeah, that was exactly what had happened. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Here's what I want. A director of business development who can get enterprise clients through the door and keep them there. Someone who understands the back end just as well as they understand the pitch. I want someone who can wear a hoodie in the server room and a suit in the boardroom and be respected in both." That was me. All day. "I'm offering you the role," he continued. "Stock options. Full autonomy. You hire your own team. And I'd back you personally." I sat with that for a beat, staring into my coffee like it might stir the future. I wasn't thinking about money, though the offer was generous. I wasn't thinking about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't taste sweet. I was thinking about what it would feel like to walk into a space where no one looked at my degree and smirked. Where results mattered more than pedigree. Where I wasn't the shadow behind someone else's spotlight. "I'm in," I said, and shook his hand. Just like that, I had a new title, a new mission, and a company that actually saw me. I left that cafe lighter than I'd felt in years. The kind of lightness that comes when you stop trying to earn someone's approval and start building something on your own terms. That night, as I walked past Rivian's glassy headquarters, I saw the lights on in the top floor. Probably Griffin burning the midnight oil to write a recovery plan for the deal he lost before it ever began. Juliana might have been in her corner office, trying to polish the spin for the board. Maybe Allison was already updating HR protocols for crisis response. They could keep it. All of it. I didn't want my seat back. I was building a new table. My first day at Axion Solutions didn't come with a red carpet or welcome banners. No one handed me a branded mug or gave a rehearsed corporate tour. Instead, I walked through the glass doors of a downtown office with high ceilings, exposed brick, and white boards covered in chaos, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. The receptionist, a tattooed 20-something named Lola, offered me a nod and a cup of coffee that was better than anything I ever had at Revian. "Silas is in the war room," she said casually. He said just walk in. The war room turned out to be a glass-walled conference space with folding chairs, a projector screen, and 4 engineers huddled around a screen, arguing about data parsing speeds. Silas sat at the end, hoodie half-sipped, nodding along as he scrolled through lines of code on his laptop. He looked up when I stepped in. "Carter," he said, smiling. "Glad you showed up. We've got work. No small talk. No back padding. Just purpose." I sat down at the only empty seat and pulled out my notes. Within 15 minutes, we were redesigning the Syntrax interface. Where Revion would have brought in a consultant and built a slideshow, Axion rolled up sleeves and started coding. We stripped the bloat out of the UI. Streamlined integration points. Built customizable dashboards that could speak directly to Syntrax's warehouse management systems. We weren't building something prettier. We were building something leaner, smarter, more responsive. It was freedom. It was respect. No one in the room cared where I went to college. No one squinted at my resume. They listened when I talked because they knew I understood what I was saying. I wasn't just steering the ship. I was down in the engine room too. By day 2, I had my team. Silas told me to pick who I wanted. No red tape. No HR gauntlets. I called Deshaun first. He didn't hesitate. "Send me the offer. I'll resign today." I pulled in 2 other engineers I'd worked with before. Once who'd always asked the hard questions in meetings, the kind of minds you build empires with. We worked fast. 12-hour days didn't feel long when every hour built something tangible. Every decision I made had weight. Every idea was met with curiosity instead of suspicion. I wasn't defending my existence anymore. I was defining it. 2 days after my start date, we were ready. Tarek and I met at a private suite in a boutique hotel overlooking the East River. He opened the door, grinned, and pulled me into a firm hug. "Knew you'd land on your feet." I placed the folder on the table between us and opened it. Inside was our new proposal. Better pricing structure, agile delivery schedule, feature enhancements that would cut Syntrax's processing time by 22%. Tarek didn't even flip to the final page before he said, "Let's do it." No haggling. No posturing. Because what we'd built spoke for itself. He pulled out a pen and signed the top sheet. $45 million. Not as big as the original Revion deal, but cleaner. This wasn't a bloated corporate ego trip with layered approvals and half-baked power plays. This was real business, built on real trust. And this time, there was no one hovering behind me to take the credit. The next morning, the news broke. Syntrax pulls deal from Revion. Signs with competitor Axion Solutions and strategic shift. The industry lit up. Analysts were stunned. Trade forums exploded with speculation. How did a smaller, lesser-known tech firm snatch a contract from one of the fastest-growing logistics platforms in the country? I didn't give interviews. I didn't post cryptic LinkedIn updates. But insiders knew. They knew Revion had gambled on perception and lost to performance. They knew who sealed that deal twice. The fallout was instant. My phone lit up again. Calls from unfamiliar numbers. Emails from vendors and partners I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were congratulations. Others were quiet inquiries. Heard what happened with Syntrax. Curious if you're taking on new clients. I was. And I had leverage now. That evening, I stood at the window of Axion's 12th-floor workspace, looking out at the lights bleeding into the skyline. Silas came up beside me, sipping a beer. "You just changed our company overnight," he said. "People are going to come at us hard now. You ready for that?" I turned to him. "I'd been ready," I said. "They just didn't see it until now." The cracks started slowly. Not loud or obvious. Just subtle shifts, like hairline fractures beneath a polished surface. But I recognized the sound of an empire groaning under the weight of its own pride. Revion was unraveling. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. It started with whispers. A missed earnings target. Rumors of internal tension. Investors asking questions that Juliana didn't have answers for. See, when Syntrax pulled out, they didn't just lose revenue. They lost credibility. The industry wasn't stupid. People asked why a flagship client would abandon a company after signing a historic contract. The press spun it gently, but insiders knew better. They knew who brokered that deal. And they knew who wasn't there when it fell apart. Griffin was in over his head. That much became clear when he attempted to patch the bleeding with a PR campaign. Revion remains committed to innovation. The headline read, plastered across every industry newsletter. I read the statement twice. It was fluff. Buzzwords wrapped in panic. He was flailing, trying to speak a language he'd never learned. And clients could smell it. I didn't celebrate. Not in a pop champagne, rub it in their face kind of way. I didn't need to. Watching the machine I helped build malfunction without me was vindication enough. Meanwhile, Axion thrived. Silas gave me full control of our enterprise outreach, and I got to work. I called vendors I'd built relationships with during my Revion years, the ones who'd told me quietly, "You're the reason we stay." I told them where I was now. No hard sell. Just facts. And they came. Deshawn was a force on the back end, optimizing our system faster than I could request it. Our two engineers, Natalie and Greg, pushed updates at a pace that stunned even Silas. We weren't big, but we were fast, agile, and accountable. The kind of team clients dream of, but rarely get. Within weeks, we landed 2 more contracts. Not as big as Syntrax, but enough to rattle Revion. One was a food distribution firm that had been negotiating with them for months. The other, a former Revion account that quietly exited and came to us with a single question. "Are you the same Mallet Carter who managed the East Line project?" "I am," I said. They signed the same week. From the outside, it looked like a few small wins. But from the inside, it was a tectonic shift. Revion's foundation wasn't just cracking. It was bleeding talent, bleeding trust. Juliana's name started disappearing from press releases. Griffin stopped tweeting. Analysts downgraded Revion's stock. The language became harsher. Leadership concerns. Client churn. Strategic misalignment. Silas printed one of the headlines and taped it to the inside of the supply closet. Revion may have lost more than just a deal. We didn't gloat. We built. Then, one afternoon, I walked into Axion's office and found Deshawn sitting at my desk, arms folded, a grin tugging at his lips. "You'll want to see this," he said, sliding his phone across the desk. It was a screenshot of a Revion internal email that had been leaked to industry forums. A board member had questioned the decision to oust me, citing direct fallout from the Syntrax collapse. Juliana had replied, short, defensive, no accountability. Just blame shifted onto market conditions and unexpected personnel turnover. It wasn't the email itself that caught my eye. It was the timestamp. Sent at 2:17 a.m. She was unraveling. That night, Silas took the entire team out for dinner, a small gesture, nothing fancy, just good food and stronger drinks. We sat around a long table laughing, sharing stories about past failures and unexpected Ws. It felt real honest, no hierarchy, no stage toasts. At one point Silas raised his glass toward me. "People say you can't teach hunger," he said, "but Malik, he reminds you why it matters." Everyone raised their glass. I didn't say anything, just nodded, humbled, because that moment wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about proving me right. After dinner, I stepped outside full and buzzed and looked up at the night sky. The city pulsed around me. Somewhere in a glass tower Juliana was probably pacing her office drafting another damage control memo. Griffin was likely buried in spreadsheets hoping to avoid another misstep, and me, I was building from the ground up this time. No one was going to take it away from me. 3 months, that's how long it took for the silence to break. I was at my desk at Ocean, reviewing the latest client onboarding metrics, when my phone vibrated. Nothing dramatic, just a soft buzz against the wood grain. The name on the screen made my stomach go still for a beat. Juliana Cross. I didn't answer, I just stared at it, watching her name pulse with each ring like it was trying to breathe life back into a corpse. After 3 rings, it stopped. A minute later, the message came through: "I miss you." That was it. No context, no apology, no mention of Revion, the board, Griffin, or Kraz. Just 3 words that once might have leveled me. Now it felt empty, like someone tapping on a door they both had shut months ago. I didn't reply. 2 days later, I heard the news is not through gossip, but from a Revion on board member. "I used to play rateball with Paul, the only one who ever treated me like I wasn't just a seat filler at the table. Thought you'd want to know," he said over the phone. "They're letting Juliana go." I leaned back in my chair. "That official? It will be by morning." He replied shareholders lost confidence after the last quarter. Griffins, already back to consulting, were seeking a buyer. Thought you'd find some satisfaction in that. I did, not in the way he expected at least. There was no spike of adrenaline, no fist pump, just a slow steady feeling of closure crawling over the edges of a wound that had long since scabbed. I didn't want her to fall, I just wanted her to see what she'd done, what she'd lost, and now she would. I ended the call politely, then turned off my phone and sat in the silence. In my old life, I might have driven past Revian HQ just to see the lights go dim. I might have scrolled through the headlines, read the speculations soaked in the narrative of downfall, but I didn't need to do any of that now. I had too much to build, too many people counting on me. At Axion we were thriving, Silas and I had launched a new initiative, and our second major client came in through a referral, someone I once mentored at Revion who'd followed my journey quietly from the sidelines. I knew you were the real reason that company stayed afloat, she told me as she signed the paperwork. Dessen expanded the tech team. Natalie rolled out a new security protocol that got picked up by a logistics trodem. We were becoming something real, something sustainable, not just a rebound story, but a force. Our software was sharper, our turnaround times were legendary, our trust ratio untouchable. But despite the wins, Juliana's message lingered in the back of my mind, not because I missed her, but because the echo of who we used to be still whispered from time to time. There was a time she had my back, a time we built side by side, shoulder to shoulder. I didn't know when that version of her vanished, but I remembered how it felt to believe we were in it together. The difference now, I no longer needed that belief to validate me. A week after her message, another text came. Do you ever think about what we built? I stared at it for a full minute, then I typed and deleted 3 different replies. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, but I wasn't about to offer nostalgia to as someone who burned the blueprint. Eventually, I wrote, we didn't build it. I did. You tore it down and hit send. There was no reply, and that finally felt like the last chapter closing. The following Friday, Silas called an all-hands meeting. We just closed our biggest month, yet revenue had doubled. Morale was sky-high. He walked to the front of the room, handed me a plaque, simple matte black wood with gold lettering, and said to the guy who reminded us that doing it right beats doing it pretty. I held it in both hands, weighty and real. The room clapped, but all I could think about was the moment Juliana fired me, how she looked right past me like I was a mistake she meant to fix. Now, the only mistake she couldn't fix was letting me go. After the applause faded, I walked back to my desk. I passed the glass walls, the coated boards, the small army of people who had chosen to believe in me, not because of politics, but because of proof, because results don't lie, reputation doesn't cheat, and legacy, it echoes louder than apologies ever could. The corner office wasn't what I imagined. Growing up, there was no cigar humidor, no marble desk, no leather armchair big enough to swallow a manhole, just a tall window that overlooked the skyline, a standing desk I actually used, and a single walnut frame hanging behind me, the kind of detail most people missed until they sat across from me. Inside the frame, in crisp parchment, my diploma from Riverside State College. I'd almost thrown it out once years ago, before Revian, before Axion, when Juliana and I were still climbing side by side. She'd said it half-jokingly one day while reorganizing the bookshelves in our apartment, you should hide that when we meet investors they like to see Stanford Wharton. Not well. This I laughed it off, then told her it didn't matter, but it had. I just didn't know how much until I saw her laugh in that boardroom, until I saw the way her Ivy League friends smirked at me like I was the punchline in a joke about public education, like my time, my sacrifices, my nights spent solving problems they couldn't even pronounce meant less now. That same degree sat on the wall behind me, framed air in walnut and brass, right next to a sleek black plaque engraved with the word CRA Deal 2025. Axion Solutions, not Revion, not Cross and Company, not Griffin Locke's polished failure, just Axion and me. The day I was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer felt like a full circle moment. Silas handed me the sealed envelope without ceremony, no cameras, no press, just a quiet morning, a handshake, and the words, "You've earned this 10 times over." I opened it at my desk alone, my name at the top, a new title, more equity, more responsibility, more freedom. I stared out the window for a long time after that. From 12 stories up, the city looked calmer, like all the noise had finally sorted itself into something that made sense. I thought about the last year, the betrayal, the silence, the panic calls, the new start, and how it all felt like both a lifetime ago and yesterday at once. The office around me wasn't just a room, it was proof that grip beats gloss, that building matters more than branding, that a reel doesn't need polish, it needs results. A few days after the announcement, Deshawn walked in with 2 lattes and a smirk. "You really did it," he said, placing 1 cup on my desk. "We did it," I corrected. He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, but they're putting your name on the door." That was true. Silas had insisted on it. "You brought in Kraz, you brought the culture, you built the team," he said. "You're not just running strategy, you are strategy." It felt good to be seen fully, not just for what I produced, but for how I carried people with me along the way. That afternoon, I got an email from a student at Riverside, logistics major, found me on LinkedIn. She wanted to know how I got to where I was. What challenges I faced. If I had any advice for someone like her, I stared at that line for a while. Someone who didn't come from connections or corporate bloodlines, someone who probably held down 2 jobs like I did, who had to walk across a campus where recruiters skipped your name because your school wasn't sexy enough for their spreadsheets. I wrote her back. I told her the truth about the boardroom, about the betrayal, about the morning I sat in my kitchen while the biggest meeting in my former company's history burned down without me, about Axion, about rebuilding, about staying sharp, staying quiet, and letting the results speak. Then I signed off with this: your degree isn't your worth, your work is. I didn't expect a reply, but a few days later she sent one thank you. I'm staying in the game. That meant more than any headline. That same week, I was invited to speak at a logistics innovation panel. I almost turned it down. Wasn't big on spotlights, but Silas pushed. People need to hear from real builders, he said. So I went, wore my usual navy blue suit, no designer name tag, no entourage, just walked onto the stage and told the story, from the busted coffee machine to the boardroom betrayal, from being fired for not fitting their mold to building something they couldn't touch. The applause wasn't thunderous, it was steady, respectful, earned. Afterward, a CEO from a rival firm pulled me aside. You don't speak like a strategist, he said. I smiled. That's because I build like one. He laughed and offered a card. Let's talk. Maybe we would, maybe not. But either way, I already had what I came for: legacy, truth in a corner office with a view. Axion wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. We'd grown 180% in 12 months, doubling our client base, launching new integrations, and expanding into 3 new sectors. The office space we once shared with a yoga startup now stretched across 2 full floors, humming with energy and quiet confidence. You could feel it the moment you stepped inside. This was a place where things got built, and not just code, reputation, trust, loyalty, the kind of things that don't show up on a spreadsheet, but keep you in the game long after competitors burn out. The Syntrax partnership had become our case study. It was printed in the latest issue of Supply Chain Innovators, laid out like gospel, how a lean tech firm outmaneuvered a juggernaut by focusing on results instead of optics. I read it once, not for ego but for memory. There was something surreal about seeing my name in bold next to a project I almost never got credit for. Now I owned it outright. Revian, on the other hand, had vanished from the headlines after Juliana's ousting and Griffin's quiet retreat back to consulting. They tried to hold on for a while. They clung to their last remaining clients like a ship in a storm, patching leaks with buzzwords. But clients don't care about press releases, they care about delivery, consistency, truth, and Revian couldn't fake it anymore. 2 of their former flagship clients transitioned to us by year's end. One of them emailed personally: you never oversold, you always delivered. That's rare. We're ready to move. That meant more than the contract. I didn't think about Juliana much anymore. She disappeared from the circles we once shared, her name reduced to whispers, and what could have been. Sometimes I wondered if she saw the headlines, if she ever drove past the building we now occupied, the 1-2 blocks from our old co-working space where it all began with a busted coffee machine and a dream. Maybe she thought about those early mornings, about how far we'd come, about the way it all ended. But I didn't dwell, not because it didn't matter, but because I'd finally outgrown the need for her recognition. Recognition came in different forms now, like the team we built, tight-knit, relentless, grounded. Deshaun ran operations like a machine. Natalie was leading our new AI logistics project, and Greg had 2 interns shadowing him full-time. Silas stepped back from day-to-day, letting me shape our long-term vision. He said it best during one of our quarterly reviews: you didn't just take a second chance, Malik, you created one. And that's what I kept thinking about: creation, not vengeance, not validation, just forward motion, building something that couldn't be stolen or silenced, something that had my fingerprints all over it, and no one else's initials stamped on top. I got a call from a university dean a few weeks ago. Riverside State was starting a mentorship program pairing alumni with promising students. They wanted me to speak on a panel. I said yes, not for the applause, but for the chance to reach the next me before they got laughed out of a boardroom for not having the right a diploma on the wall. When I walked into that lecture hall, I saw myself in a dozen faces, eyes hungry but cautious, like they weren't sure if they were allowed to dream big, and worn sneakers and student debt. I stood at the podium, hands steady, voice calm. I didn't start with much, I said, but I started with enough. And they listened. Back at the office that evening, I stayed late. Most of the lights had dimmed outside. The city pulsed in its usual rhythm, unaware of how many revolutions lived in the silence of empty hallways. I walked to my office, the corner one framed in clean lines and soft shadows, and stood in front of the walnut-framed degree. It hadn't moved, it didn't need to. Next to it, I'd added something new, a small silver plate engraved with a simple phrase: "Lisi isn't given, it's built." And I believe that with everything in me, because in a world obsessed with shortcuts and image, I took the long road, because I didn't just rebuild what they tried to take, I surpassed it, because I didn't just survive, I led.